So you're interested in learning Terran. You feel like you have a lot to figure out and learn. And today I want to go over how you should approach your first few games that you play as Terran. What should you be doing? Okay. Now, before I go into the exact details about which Terran things you should be doing, I think it's just important to review a little bit about the race Terran. Terran, compared to the other races, have very high damage ranged units. They have the ability to tech very, very quickly in the game. They're a race that's really micro intensive. In other words, you have to move your units a lot and control your army a lot, or else you'll lose the game. Uh, the other races, they're a little more forgiving, where if you if you don't control your army that well, a lot of times it doesn't mean that you just auto lose. Terran also tends to focus a lot on having a composition of units in comparison to the other races, where you may choose one strategy very hard and kind of push that strategy very hard. In terms of the hotkeys that you use for Terran, you should use one. Typically, players use 1 and 2 for their army, and and usually they put their special units on 2. Special units are units like your medevacs, your ghosts, your Vikings, and then put the rest of their army on 1, depending on what they're trying to do. Advanced players will add a third hotkey for their army and shift everything over 1. Typically, they use the button 3 for their command centers, armories, and engineering bays, and they use 4 for their factory for their production of their units, such as their barracks, factories, and starports. And a lot of times when they build, they use tab to go between the the between those buildings while they're building. And they call that tab building. Okay, so in terms of uh, the types of tech trees that are commonly talked about in the game, usually people talk about bio and mech. There's also cheesy styles where you have very very quick rushes that tend to try and just do a lot of damage, get really far ahead, or end the game immediately. And the bio style is usually centered around your stim and your upgrades, and using your mobility advantages and that high DPS with range, so that you can sort of attack their stuff without actually taking damage. So you might have Marines that you drop, you stim in, and you do some damage, and you run away before they can hit your Marines. As far as mech goes, usually you have some sort of harass with Hellions or Banshees, and you're building up a big army. You have to have a lot of patience. When they attack you, you have to be really patient about not overextending. It's usually you're shooting for long games with mech, at least 15 minutes, and it's very position heavy. The so the as far as the Terran goes, unlike other RTS, Terran has a dilemma, which is versus the other two races. How do they play against those races? What should they be thinking about the game as they're playing along? Versus Zerg, your mindset should entirely be, how can I do damage versus Zerg? How can I keep them from getting lots and lots more workers than I have and a bigger army? You should, as far as versus Zerg goes, it's really important to watch your add-on timings early on and not get too many add-ons too fast, because you need lots of units to do the damage. And another problem is, as far as versus Zerg, is that the Zerg mass large amounts of larvae, and so you have to figure out how to remax. It's a very tough, challenging question. How am I going to match the production of the Zerg? Now, as far as versus Toss, the Protoss tend to have a gimmick, and skip it. Typically, versus Protoss, the most important aspect of the game is finding out what their tech trees are and identifying those. Most importantly is the Reaper Scout early on, and most important is finding all 3 pylons in their base. It gives you the ability to determine where they can put their tech buildings, as well as identifying which if they're proxying something that you need to prepare for one of the proxy styles. Typically, if you're looking for really, really early transitions when they're proxying, you'll scan their base around 6:10, and if you find all three pylons, typically you scan around 7-8 minutes to identify what they're doing. And generally, there's a lot of times players will try and use harass, like drops, widow mines, things like that, to find the tech. It's another way that you can scout and figure out what the gimmicks are that the Protoss are doing. Also, versus Protoss, it's really, really important to be able to pick the right tech trees as you're going along versus Protoss. Typically, when they start Colossus, you want to go for 2 starports to have a good Viking count, as well as getting upgrades for your Vikings. And if they don't have a good Viking count, typically it's more important to get out more barracks or ghosts. So I'll kind of emphasize a little bit about that. Those are the transitions that in general you want to do during the game. Okay. Now Terran again has these matchup problems. Looks like I forgot to fill in the bullet points there for Zerg, but I'll focus more on that in another build another day, anyways. Terran versus Terran, the most common build is to go into a single barracks, a single factory, and a single starport, or what they call the 1-1-1 build. And a lot of times you'll have one player that goes 1-1-1 versus another player that goes 1-1-1, and the one player might go a set of Banshees. They might both go Banshees, or you'll see them also do that build and sort of go for these really fast drops with Widow Mines. And it's one of the most common ways that Terran versus Terran is done to take advantage of the very high DPS they have. Reapers also, a lot of times if you can get ahead on Reapers, you can set yourself so far ahead that you'll win the game. So a lot of times you'll have Reapers kind of pushing out really hard, and a lot of the micro is Reaper versus Marine micro in that case, because they have one or two Marines working while they're working up to the 1-1-1 or expanding, and you have to really focus on positioning your Marines well in that. The mid game in general, when you're taking fights in Terran versus Terran, is all about controlling map position and preventing them from getting whatever map position they're going for. In terms of Terran versus Protoss, Protoss often like to expand very, very early on, around 450 to 510, somewhere around that range, and they use the mothership core to hold their expansions. Typically, the first 2 photon overcharges are really important to know their exact timings, and so I want to point out that the first photon overcharge usually comes around 6 minutes, and the second comes around 8:40. In photon overcharge, they recently shortened it, I believe, so it's only 30 seconds instead of like 40 seconds. So usually you want to pressure around whatever attack you're going to do, force out the first photon overcharge, and then you have until that overcharge is done, until the second one comes up around 8:40 to try and inflict some damage. Now, if they don't use the 2 overcharges, then they can use the 2 time warps as well. So a lot of players like to just force out the overcharge. They don't have the 2 time warps for an attack around the 8:49 minute mark. As I mentioned before, it's really, really important to have those Reapers and scans. Often it's important, if you don't see that third tech tree, you want to use your 610 scan to look for it. If your build's a little behind, use the 650 scan to try and find either the proxy buildings or whatever tech they've hidden. And as I mentioned before, the Reapers, it's really important to find the 3 pylons. The Terran versus Zerg, I'm going to focus on more on another day. But in general, as I mentioned before, it's all about not falling behind. You see lots of Hellions Hellions and Marauders versus Roach play, with Roachling play, or you see sort of a very bio-heavy style to force out the Mutalisks and Marines. In Terran vs. Zerg, it's all about surprise and controlling the scouting that game has. So since Terran is so micro-intensive, I think it's important to step aside and kind of discuss micro for a minute before going into a specific build. These are in general the major things that you should learn as a Terran player for the micro. You should learn how to stutter step Marines. What that means is that you attack, you move your Marine back, and then the moment that he can attack again, you tell them to attack again. So usually what you do is you click, you hit S, you click, you hit S, you click, you hit S, and I'll show this. Marine splits is when the mass wave of banelings comes in, that you want to be able to split your marines, prevent that mass wave of banelings from connecting good. You want to have the banelings hit one baneling per marine if you can, or even a baneling per two marines if you have good enough upgrades. It's really important to learn baneling target fire, so if they attack with two banelings and a big set of wings, that you shoot down those banelings. Hot drops is another important one. What that means is that you're dropping out of the dropship as it's moving. Usually to do that, you tell the dropship, you click where to go, and then you click D and click on the dropship, and they'll drop the marines as they're moving. The Banshee bouncing, usually you want to attack with the Banshee, and the moment that it fires, you want to click back so they start to move back, and then you want to hit stops, so that they're just a far enough distance away that you can continually shoot and keep them from shooting your Banshee. So it's kind of learning when to click and when to hit stop so that your distance stays good. As far as when they come in with waves of units, it's really important to know how to position your Marauders and Hellbats so that the Colossus are only shooting one Marauder or one Hellbat, or the Thors are only shooting the Mutalisks because of their positioning. They're keeping the Mutalisks away from the army. Another one that's commonly used is what's called rolling Hellions. So usually you have Zerglings chasing the Hellions, and when the Zerglings are chasing the Hellions, usually what you do is you want to keep the Hellions sort of moving and cycling through so that the one or two of the Hellions are taking damage, and then take positioning. Now, in terms of the micro resources, these are some of the items that you'd probably want to use to try and practice a lot of your Terran micro. I think one of the best ones is the Starcraft 2 micro tournament. I would suggest playing a game or two of that a day if you're interested in really getting down Terran. The micro trainer Darglings is nice because you don't have to look for people, or you look for specific builds, and it's good at practicing the big army battles, so that which can take a while to sort of build up to, or practicing splitting marines, things like that. Starcraft Master is nice. It has some interesting situations with micro as well. It's a lot like Darklings. Came out about a year after Darklings did. And Blizzard has some challenge maps for each unit also, which are useful in figuring out what to do. And also there's the unit